Hello and welcome along to episode 6 of Caribbean Football Weekly on Reggae Boys Commentary. Can't believe it's episode 6 already. It's gone so quickly, but there we go. Anyway, I'm Nathan Carr from the home of Caribbean Football, and I'm joined by Guyanese football blog man Santoki Nagulandran. Santoki, how are you doing, mate?
I'm great, Nathan. Looking forward to talking about some Caribbean football. How are you?
Yeah, very well, very well. It's worth pointing out that, or a little reminder for people listening, that Simon Preston is not with us today. Did mention this on last week's show, that he's on holiday at the moment. So it's myself and Santoki who are going to be doing this episode. The same kind of format as usual. Just going through some bits and pieces, and we've got quite an interesting kind of subtopic to delve into in the middle, and then round off with a question or two from you guys, the listeners. So Santoki, obviously, I suppose the main news item really is the CONCACAF Champions League, which went on last week, but there were some other things as well to mention.
Yeah, so the CONCACAF Champions League. Firstly, transfer news. We have Pernell Schultz from Trinidad and Tobago side Morvant Caledonia. He got a transfer to Guyanese team Alpha United. Now, Pernell Schultz was featured on your Caribbean Young Stars, Nathan, on your Home of Caribbean blog. He had a great 2014-15 season for Caledonia. He was named one of the young players of the season, but recently injuries and lack of form have hurt him. So he's moved back to Guyana, hoping to regain form for Alpha United. So it'll be interesting to see if he does re-find his form and whether he can develop again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he did feature on Caribbean Young Stars, but I don't know. I think he was one of the older players on that list. He was kind of further up the development ladder. So we wish him all the best.
I think he's 22 at the moment. So yeah,
22. Yeah. So we wish him all the best at Alpha. Just talking actually about a player that's moved recently, a Caribbean footballer that's moved recently, Duckens Nazon. Really sad news that he has had to stop his contract with Tondela in the Portuguese league because he's failed a medical. The club detected a heart failure during his medical, so unfortunately he's been released and he won't be able to play for them for this upcoming season. I don't think it's anything more than that, but you know it is scary because you think of Akeem Adams in 2013 who died from a heart attack, and his fellow countryman from Trinidad and Tobago, Kevin Carter, as well, passed away, didn't he, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So, unfortunate for Duckens Nazon because one of the stars of Haiti's 2015 Gold Cup campaign and did well at Copper. So hopefully he can get a new club soon. The CONCACAF Champions League. Obviously, that was played last week, the start of the group games. Central FC, W Connection and Don Bosco involved. Santo, did you manage to, A, kind of catch any of the games, or B, have you got any opinion on where you think these teams are at following the first round of scores?
Yeah, I did manage to catch brief glimpses of Central FC versus Vancouver Whitecaps. It was a bit disappointing for Central FC. They couldn't play Kenwyne Jones in time. He is ruled ineligible due to transfer regulations coming from abroad. So obviously they were lacking their killer striker for that match. Also, Vancouver did seem to field a second string team. So their first team was training in Dallas, I believe, and they sent a second string out to the Caribbean to play Central FC. It was a tight match, but I did feel Vancouver sort of dominated possession, and Central FC just lacked a cutting edge, which hopefully the arrival of Kenwyne Jones will remedy in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, we were all kind of thinking that Kenwyne Jones was going to start against Vancouver Whitecaps, and then Wide868 reported that Jones didn't have an international transfer certificate, and I think he did show, as you say, they lacked that cutting edge. They were actually acquitted themselves relatively well. I know it wasn't a full strength Vancouver team, but they weren't by any means embarrassed. It's just that they didn't quite have the quality going forward. Joseph Marcano seemed to be up front by himself. Nicholas Dillon from the under-20 national team. He was kind of in a supporting role, but they didn't quite have enough. Keron Cummings, it was good to see him make a cameo appearance off the bench. Shot in the leg in December last year, so great for him to come back. Hopefully he'll feature for Translago in World Cup qualifying next month as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Central should be too worried. I think there's positive signs, plenty of positives to take away from it. W Connection, the only team, Caribbean team to score. They were probably expected to lose, though, weren't they, against Pumas?
Yeah, I think it's sadly predictable that Caribbean teams in the CONCACAF Champions League do tend to look out of their depth, and so you wouldn't really expect one to win, especially against a Mexican team who are always the strongest in the region. So yeah, W Connection, they've done well to score 2 goals. They lost 4-2 in the end, but unfortunately it wasn't enough, and they were playing at home, so you'd expect for it to be a trickier time when they do travel away to Mexico in the future.
Yeah, the goal scorers for Connection were Houston Hector, really nice free kick, Peach free kick, and Jamal Rowe-Childs, who also, talking of Caribbean stars, featured last year on that. And the final game was Don Bosco, wasn't it? Don Bosco nil, Monterrey 3. Monterrey, I think, are quite high up heavyweights in Mexican football. This was on Haitian soil. Don Bosco are a semi-professional club, so again, weren't expected to win really, and a shame that they weren't able to score.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in saying Monterrey are one of the heavyweights of the region. I believe they won the CONCACAF Champions League maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago, because I do remember they played in the Club World Cup against Chelsea a few seasons ago. So they are one of the heavyweights in the region, and yeah, an expected result. I mean, especially against a semi-professional club. Yeah,
they've got a few good youngsters though, Don Bosco, like Benchi Estamo and Ken Lee Deed and Ricardo Aide, I think it is, or Aide. Because I did a profile on them, just researching a couple of their players, because they do kind of go under the radar, and they've got some good players.
I've got an interesting question for you, Nathan. So, do you think that it's a lack of respect for MLS teams or Mexican teams to send out their second string sides against the Caribbean teams, or do you think it's beneficial for Caribbean teams to play against younger or reserve players to give it more of a competitive edge?
I suppose it depends. I mean, I can understand why an MLS team would want to prioritise their league possibly over the CONCACAF Champions League, and if they deem Caribbean opposition to be inferior, and they genuinely feel that, like Vancouver Whitecaps, that their second string side is capable of getting 3 points, I can understand that. I mean, we had that with English clubs, don't we, in the UEFA Europa League as well. When you're like, when teams are like, well, do you really need to rotate the whole 11? Is it disrespectful? I think a little bit, yeah. But if anything, I'd be looking, if I was a Caribbean team, I'd be looking at that in a positive light. I'm thinking, okay, well, the star names aren't there. That's just incentivized me even more to go and try and get a result.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think it would give Caribbean teams more of an incentive to win, where if they're playing the second team, it gives them a confidence boost. Also, it does add a little bit of competitive edge to the games. I mean, if you sent a full string MLS side and they hammered, say, W Connection 5-6-0, it wouldn't be beneficial to W Connection players at all. So it does give a competitive edge. But then on the other hand, you can see why some may feel it is a sense of disrespect sending out a second string team. But again, this links also to the fact that travel times in the Caribbean are quite lengthy. So from a club's perspective in the MLS, you can see why they wouldn't want to send their first teamers out on a long haul flight to the Caribbean and then back again, when it could jeopardize their league, which is more important for most MLS teams.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it makes me think that of Portland Timbers when they travelled to Alpha United, and there was a lot of media talk about Portland's journey to Guyana for that game.
I believe it took 20 hours for them to get from Portland to Guyana. They had to make about 6 stop-offs.
Yeah.
And so you can see.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Exactly. So the next round of CONCACAF Champions League games, I think, are next week or a week and a half. So hopefully, results pick up for the Caribbean teams. In other news, the CONCACAF Girls Under 15 Championship that kicks off tomorrow in Orlando in the States. 16 out of 23 of the countries participating in that competition from the Caribbean, 5 groups altogether. And yeah, the inaugural competition was in 2014. So this under 15 girls championship hasn't been going too long. It's still in its infancy, really. But I guess really at this championship, Santoki, the emphasis is more on development and trying to see progress and blood the youngsters into the seniors in the future rather than results necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. I would say it wouldn't be a results focused competition, more a developmental thing, just to get the girls used to playing together as a unit, especially in the Caribbean when women's football does tend to be neglected. So this will start the developmental process. It's also great that it's being held in America as well. So the players and the children will get experience of flying to America, playing in big stadiums, bigger than what they're used to, and then also developing as a team.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully there's some decent attendances at the games as well. With it being in America, you'd hope that the publicity would kind of be a little bit better than.
Do you know what type of stadiums they're playing? I imagine they're not playing at full capacity, 80,000 stadiums. Would they be playing in like colleges or?
I mean, I don't know this for sure. I imagine it would be college or university level stadiums, and probably not. You wouldn't expect it really, would you? I suppose to be MLS stadiums, but it's still a good experience, I think. And I'm guessing under 15, it's mainly going to be friends and family that turn up. With a sprinkling of general observers. Group A, by the way, features Haiti, who were the runners-up in 2014. They lost out to Canada in the final. And also Trinidad and Tobago, who beat Honduras in the third place playoff to finish third. So, Group A is quite tough. I think without wanting to put too much pressure on the girls, in Group A you probably want to look out for. And I think Group D and E features exclusively just Caribbean countries. We'll try and keep everyone updated on that. In other news, India against Puerto Rico, friendly, 4th of September. That has been confirmed. So that's a FIFA date. And I know that Santoki talked about this on the last week's show about India's sort of friendly negotiations. Mentioned Guyana, but it's Puerto Rico, and that's going to be played in Mumbai.
Yeah, correct. Mumbai on September the 4th. So it should be a great occasion. Caribbean team playing in India. I'd imagine in India you would get a lot of fans for a national team game, just because of the general size of the population, and they do tend to sell out most of their games in national stadiums. So it'll be a great experience for both sides, I guess. Yeah,
and good preparation as well ahead of the Caribbean Cup because, Puerto Rico are going to be playing in October.
It's also been announced that Guyana Football Federation is in negotiations with St. Kitts, who we've mentioned on previous shows as one of the rising teams in the region. So they're in negotiations to play a match in September during the September FIFA international window. So St. Kitts are playing Nicaragua, I think, late August, but they're looking to host a home game. And Guyana has been identified as one possible opponent. So again, we'll keep you updated on what happens in that situation as the weeks progress.
Yeah, I'm just thinking actually that would be it would obviously be good for Guyana, but it would be really quite good for St. Kitts to have the back-to-back games. Traveling to Nicaragua and then at home to Guyana. But that would be again good preparation for Caribbean Cup qualifiers, which start in October. I think that's more or less it for general news. Now, I was speaking to Santoki off air about an article that I read earlier this week on the Royal Gazette, which is a Bermudian newspaper. And it was an article entitled Small Mentality. And it was about kind of tackling two issues about Caribbean footballers having a small, narrow-minded mentality when it comes to their approach to their careers in football, and also looking at the fact that Ronaldo, of all players, Ronaldo was from a small island and obviously one of the greatest in the world, and looking at the kind of can Bermuda, because obviously a Bermudian newspaper, can Bermuda produce the next Ronaldo? And I know that Santoki also saw an article similar to this about Paul Pogba in a Guyanese newspaper. So really, what we were going to talk about is this mentality issue. And Santoki, do you think straight off the bat that Caribbean players, particularly up and coming youngsters, they possess a small, narrow-minded mentality when it comes to their careers, in that they think maybe, right, I've conquered my local league, I've conquered, I don't know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines or Dominica or whatever, and that's me done now. I can put my feet up, and I don't need to prove anything else.
In some degree, I do believe that is an attitude, but I believe the more pressing issue is the fact that the system in Caribbean football of lack of professional football does hinder and affect that mentality. I mean, in Europe, players are fortunate enough to know if you train hard, diet, focus hard, you could be earning £100,000 a week at a club in Europe. Whereas in the Caribbean, a very minority, a handful of players make it out into North America or Europe. So with that lack of end goal for a lot of players, they do tend to get distracted and lose a lot of focus. Whereas in Europe, North America, there's an end goal, there's an objective to reach. Whereas in the Caribbean, I think that's missing, and that affects a lot of players in their mentality as to what they can achieve within football. I agree that somewhere like Bermuda could have the next Ronaldo. We've seen it in athletics with Jamaica. The Caribbean does have a lot of natural athletes, but it's about developing that natural talent into organised professional level of sports. And that transition is what's tricky, and it does affect young players' mentality. Your thoughts, Nathan?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm just thinking of, obviously a lot of football in the Caribbean, as you say, because we haven't got a regional pro league, is amateur. And I suppose it is difficult if you're going to work 9 till 5. I don't know, you work in a factory or quite a humdrum job, and then you go and train in the evening. It is going to be difficult, isn't it, to kind of psych yourself up and think, okay, you know, I got contracts coming my way, or a scout's going to go and watch me or whatever, because you're going to be tired from working. So that amateur ethos that kind of runs through the Caribbean doesn't help, I don't think. But you can flip it, and you can look at the case of Dwight Yorke, who, you know, as an 18-year-old kid from the tiny island of Tobago, for him to, you know, go on to play for Man United and win the treble, win the league in 98, 99, 99, 2000, and 2000 and 2001, and go on to do what he did and captain the Soca Warriors at the World Cup. That's tremendous. And I think he acts as a role model to any up-and-coming Caribbean kid who plays football. He has to be a role model. You know, he's probably, I'd say Dwight Yorke is probably the number one when it comes to a Caribbean football export. He is the number one for what he's achieved and what he's done in global football. So, you know, he's shown that it can be done. Although it does ultimately, doesn't it, come down to, I guess, a variety of factors. I mean, luck is obviously important. He was pretty lucky, Dwight Yorke, that Graham Taylor came over to Trinidad and Tobago with Aston Villa, and then, you know, things materialised from there, and he got the trial at Villa. You know, it comes down to obviously ability. Are you good enough? I suppose it comes down to opportunity as well. You know, it's all very well having the ability, but if you haven't got that window of opportunity, then it's futile. It's pointless. You know, you haven't got a platform to express it on. So I suppose there's all of that kind of thing. All those factors, aren't there, to take into consideration?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, but I agree. Dwight Yorke should be held as an inspiration. I know it was a long time ago, but his individual talent and perseverance did get him a move to the Premier League. I mean, in more recent times, you've had Kenwyne Jones. He's made a move to the Premier League straight from Trinidad, and he even said himself in interviews with the English media, it was either a decision to join the army or become a professional footballer, and that motivated him to persevere and make a move to England. So it is partly to do with individual motivation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you haven't got the drive, I mean, you can't really teach that, can you? You can't teach the drive and the spirit. But that's just a small part of it. You know, the opportunities, I think, do play a massive role. I mean, going back to Bermuda, commitment comes into it. You know, this mentality, this small mentality that we've talked about. I know that some Bermudan national team players, for the rearranged game, Caribbean Cup game against French Guyana in June, some of them picked going to the Carnival, which I know is massive in Bermuda, over travelling to French Guyana to play in that game. Bermuda went on to lose with a B squad, really, and then their Gold Cup hopes were dashed and, you know, ultimately shattered. So you've got to be committed. I know Gavin James as well. Gavin James, the English striker for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he said recently that he noticed when he first went into camp with Vincey Heat that some players, they just weren't interested. You know, he didn't name names obviously, but they just weren't interested. Representing their country wasn't seen as, you know, as particularly significant to them. They weren't bothered, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, focusing on Guyanese football, you have Gregory Jackie Chan, as his nickname is, Gregory Richardson. He made a move from Guyana to Trinidadian side Joe Public, played in the CONCACAF Champions League against New England Revolution, who were the MLS champions at the time, and he scored a hat-trick against them, and they won 3-2 for Joe Public. He got a move to the MLS, but after that, lack of discipline has seen him move back to Guyana. In a CONCACAF Champions League game, Alpha against Portland, held in Portland, he went off shopping with a few other players before the match kicked off, was suspended, missed out on the game, and now found himself back in Guyana playing club football. So there's an example of how a player has handed the opportunity, but their own mentality and ill discipline has cost them a potential fruitful career in North America in this instance. So again, there are opportunities. I wouldn't say the Caribbean is completely blocked off. There's no region in football where you're completely blocked off from any exposure. But it is culturally, there does seem to be a laid-back attitude, which does hinder a lot of players, as you mentioned with the Bermuda Carnival incident.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the bigger picture, I don't see why the Caribbean in the future, call me crazy, but can't produce another Ronaldo or a Messi. You know, why can't they? Usain Bolt, arguably the biggest star in track and field, comes from Jamaica. You know, some of the greatest cricketers. Look at the West Indies team in the 70s and 80s. You know, they massively influenced cricket. So why can't the Caribbean go on to? Yes, there are barriers, but you know, the talent's there, and the opportunities start to come. Then, you know, we've seen that Dwight Yorke, he was, you know, he wasn't just a passenger with United. You know, he contributed massively to the treble, scoring goal after goal. And you've got kids like Levi Garcia, who's out with AZ at the moment in Europe, Leon Bailey out with Genk from Jamaica. So, you know, we're starting to see a bit of progress there. I mean, I've been reading Sean Goater's autobiography recently as well, and he was talking about Andrew Bascombe, who just was recently left as Bermuda national team manager. He, in the 80s, he was seen as like one of the best footballers that Bermuda has ever produced. Really, really good quality footballer, very gifted. But there was talk that he might even go to Ajax and sign a contract there. Clubs in Mexico were after him. But Sean Goater said that homesickness, the fear of being homesick and missing that island, you know, missing the weather, missing the food, the culture, your family, that's ultimately acted as a deterrent, and that's why he didn't. Obviously, an injury didn't help with his kind of stunting his development. But that kind of fear, do you know what I mean? So that's another strand when it comes to the mentality. Maybe Caribbean footballers aren't prepared to adapt and take sacrifices, which are really needed to better yourself in football.
I mean, there is often comparisons to Caribbean football being 30 or 40 years behind European football. And in this sense, it does remind me of England before the Premier League, when a lot of players had to decide whether to take up a day job or play football semi-professionally. And it was the establishment of like structured league in the Premier League, which did bring about a change in the attitude. So this links back to previous debates we had about the need for a pro league in the Caribbean. And that will provide a goal for players to succeed in the pro league, get exposure, make that move to North America and Europe. It provides an incentive for them to maintain that discipline and change their mentality.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think though that, you know, there is this sense that if you conquered the Caribbean, you know, if you're the star player in your league, sometimes, you know, there isn't this underlying motivation to go elsewhere and really test yourself. And I think that sometimes players are all too content with just what they've got, and then they're ultimately, you know, they don't quite fulfill the ability that they had in their careers.
I do think there is often a lack of confidence within certain players. As you said, they prefer to be a big fish in a small pond, essentially. And that lack of confidence leads them to stick to what they know, essentially. And that does seem to be a problem with a lot. I mean, you do get often Guyanese players complaining they're homesick.
Yeah,
you do get Guyanese players saying they're homesick when they have moved to Trinidad, for instance, which isn't too far. So there is that mentality which needs to change. And I don't think it'll be a short-term solution to that change. Long-term, we need to see a change to this mentality within the region.
Yeah, I do feel also you bang on, but I do feel also that there's this laid back culture that permeates the
Mm.
Caribbean. We do. You associate it's a stereotype, laid back, relaxing, and I think sometimes that, as good as that is, that kind of stands against the development of Caribbean players. This kind of oh no, don't worry, it's fine. You know,
Yeah,
um, don't worry about me. There's no rush. When really, kind of European players, and I'm stereotyping, they're more efficient. They're more focused. They're hungrier. Without wanting to generalize.
yeah,
There's a sense
yeah.
of
I would agree
urgency.
with you. I mean, yeah, I mean, in cricket they have the same issues. Whereas the West Indies were a great force now, in the professional era, you're seeing West Indies struggling because a lot of players do not have that discipline. So your point is valid that it could be a cultural thing within the Caribbean.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I don't want to tarnish every player with the same brush because obviously that would be hugely
Mm.
unfair. But I'm just saying, like, sometimes that is the case. I feel.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting. I think ultimately, but it boils down, doesn't it, to the individual's self-belief and ambition and drive. And then you always need luck. You always need luck. And if you work hard, I'm sure opportunities will follow. But I just thought that was interesting from the Royal Gazette, looking at the mentality and also, looking at superstars of world football and where they've come from. Ronaldo from Madeira. I mean, it's a bit different because I think their infrastructure is probably, a little bit better maybe, but similar sort of situation. It was a small island, and he worked his way up. So yeah, gonna go on to the question section, which we usually have to round off the show. And this is from Ed. This question, and it's about the Dominican Republic. And
okay.
his question is: can the Dominican Republic? I guess he means the national team and just football there in that country generally grow more in the next decade. So in the next 10 years, can Dominican football blossom and grow and get better? I mean, I'll sort of say what I think after yourself. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic have never been a top team, but they've always been in the upper echelons, I believe, of Caribbean football. Similar to when we discussed Cuba on a past show, Dominican Republic had a bad 2015, so they lost to Belize, I believe, in the World Cup qualifiers. And I believe there were problems within the federation, but they do seem to have picked themselves up in the Caribbean Cup qualifiers. So they defeated Bermuda and French Guiana in the last group. They'll be playing in the next round in October. And they are led by a talented Jonathan Fana, who's their all-time goal scorer, all-time caps, made most appearances. So they do have talented players within that squad, and they do put the results together. But again, a problem which does seem to hinder a lot of teams in the region is problems with the federation and ensuring that development. So Nathan, what are your thoughts on the Dominican Republic?
Yeah, I agree. They are in the upper bracket, I would say, but they always seem to be nearly men. The Dominican Republic. They're always just on the verge and never quite do it. They've never won the Caribbean Cup. They've never got to the Gold Cup. They've never really produced anything truly like memorable or significant. It's harsh and frank, but in the Caribbean, they've always been just close.
Yeah.
But they have got a professional league which came into play last year, and I think that is helping their national team because they've got now quite a decent player pool in the LDF to select from. And you've got to remember as well, in terms of population, the Dominican Republic, a big country in the Caribbean, the second largest in terms of population behind Cuba, roughly about 10 million population.
Oh wow.
So that compare that to Anguilla, Montserrat, Turks and Caicos
Yeah.
Island. They've got a lot of people to choose from. But then I suppose by the same token, you look at the sports that are popular in that country. Baseball is massive. A lot of Dominican baseball players that go over to America to play professionally. Also, athletics is pretty popular. The national stadium is named after Felix Sanchez, the former Jamaica runner. I think football isn't the number one sport there, and that probably doesn't help. Isn't really favourable to to its development. The FA, as you mentioned, yeah, Dries Guzman, has been some controversy surrounding him before. But I think the fan base from social media, I think the fan base is there for the Dominican Republic. There's a big interest in football there. You know, they've got the Spanish diaspora as well. So I think that the interest is there. But they always seem to be on the verge, but never quite able to do it. So about the diaspora, they've got two players at Real Madrid, Mariano Diaz and Raúl de Thomas, that play for the Castilla team. One of them, Mariano Diaz, has actually played for the Dominican Republic before. Both were born in Spain. And then they've got a kid as well called Iran Familia Castillo, who's just signed for Chelsea from Ajax.
Oh, wow. And
he was born in the Netherlands, but his mum and his dad are both from the Dominican Republic. So, looking at the diaspora, they've got various players that could come in and, I don't know how realistic that is, but they could come in and boost the squad overall. I mean, how do you think they'll do in the Caribbean Cup in that group with Trinidad and Tobago, who will be the favourites, and Martinique?
Oh, that's a very tough group. I believe realistically, you've got to assume Trinidad will win that group based on their form in the past 18 or so months. But there is the lifeline in the form of second place going on to if you come second place, you move on to the 5th place playoff. So that will be a battle between Dominican Republic and Martinique, which I think is a pretty even contest. They're both similar type of teams. I mean, Martinique have experience of going to the Gold Cup before, but generally they do tend to be seen. They are teams who are always nearly at the top, but never quite reaching there. So it will be quite an interesting battle to see in those battles between the islands.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it'll be good to see them at the Gold Cup, the Dominican Republic, as a new team. And I think, as I say, the interest would definitely be there. You look at the composition of their squad; they have got some good players. Like Jonathan Fano is obviously the talisman. Yeah. They've got a lot of flair, sort of low central gravity players in midfield, like Adipo Rodriguez. I know he had a good Caribbean Cup sort of campaign in June. And I think the fact that Jean Carlos Lopez, who was on Caribbean Stars list, the fact that they're playing regularly like professional football in their own country, that's got to help them, surely. Like a lot of their players.
Yeah, from bringing back to your point about flair, from what I've seen of Dominican Republic, of the Caribbean teams, they're probably the team who play most similar to a South American team. If you saw them, you didn't know it was Dominican Republic, you would think there was a South American team. They don't really seem like a Caribbean team, so they do have that flair. But again, it's the discipline in getting the results which often hinders them.
Yeah, they've got that Spanish influence, haven't they? I mean, obviously a Spanish-speaking country. The coach is Spanish, Carlos Garcia Diaz, who used to be at Atletico Madrid in some capacity. So they've got some decent players, but it's just about getting results really, and it's all very well playing well, isn't it? But I'm fascinated to see how they're doing in the Caribbean Cup. I know Trinidad and Tobago, I think they probably will win, but that battle between Martinique, who are also a growing force with French influence, and then the Dominican Republic, that'll be really interesting. I think. So that is pretty much it in terms of the questions. I'm just trying to. Have you got any other questions? I'm trying to think. I've got one actually. I'm thinking from a little while back when we did episode 1 or 2, but it never got asked. But have you got any at all? So I don't feel.
I just got one about the CONCACAF Champions League, which we've obviously covered earlier in the show. Yeah.
All right. My one was just to round off the show. My one was I forgot who it was from now. I do apologise, but. It was how will Brexit, bit of a deep one, how will Brexit affect Caribbean footballers, coming over from the Caribbean to the UK to play football? Obviously, it depends what happens with the negotiations and whatnot, and the priorities that the UK puts on football, really. But in a way, it actually might help Caribbean footballers, because I think before there was the argument that, like, without getting too much into politics here, because we are a football show, but politics and football, you can never get them away. But I think before there was this argument that non-EU nationals were getting too much priority, but Polish and Lithuanian and so on. So maybe EU nationals. Sorry. So maybe non-EU nationals, like from the Caribbean and South America and so on, might get might come good out of this Brexit.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because obviously we don't know the terms of Brexit. But I think at the moment it's very tricky for a non-EU player to get a visa to work in the UK as a football player, because you do need to be in I believe it's top 50 ranked nation.
Top 50, yeah.
You need to be making 75% of national team appearances for a top 50 ranked nation, which according to latest FIFA rankings would only, I think, qualify Jamaican or Trinidadian players. So it is quite tricky at the moment for non-EU players, especially in the Caribbean, to make it to the UK. So I don't know how Brexit will affect those laws, whether it'll equal out the playing field between EU nationals now and non-EU nationals. So we'll have to see how it is. But as we were talking about obstacles to Caribbean footballers making it, that is one obstacle. A lot of Caribbean footballers can't make it to the UK. They can't get the work permits because they don't fulfill the requirements, which is tricky because naturally the Caribbean does have links to the UK, historical links, and they speak the same language. So it would be easier for a Caribbean player from, say, Trinidad or Jamaica to make the transition to the UK rather than the current route, which seems to be going to like Lithuania, Holland, Finland, where the language barrier affects them. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
That is true. That is true about the cultural similarities, especially for the Anglophone Caribbean anyway, English speaking, and they've got the British Overseas Territories, which you would think that Brexit wouldn't affect things too much for like the Cayman Islands, and not that a great deal of players from there come over to the UK to play, in English football, but still, you wouldn't think that would affect it too much at all. And they've talked about strengthening again with the Commonwealth, which again might actually stand in the Caribbean's favour. We'll see obviously how that goes. But yeah, I mean, the fact that, as you say, they've got that top 50 rule now, it does make it a hell of a lot harder. And also the MLS, just moving abroad generally, you've got 8 international spots open in an MLS team. I mean, how many are realistically going to go to the Caribbean? So I think it's harder now to get off the islands. And again, that just brings you back to the Pro League, doesn't it? And why?
I mean, they do have the MLS does have the CFU Combine, but I believe only one player did pass the test and make it to an MLS team in the end, out of say the 70 or so who went for trial. So it is very hard odds to make it from the Caribbean, even to the US, which is geographically quite close.
Yeah, that was you're right. That was Stefano Rysel, I think, wasn't it, from Suriname? Got released from Seattle Sounders in the end, but. Yeah, I mean, that's a good initiative. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Caribbean players that get drafted in that combine, the Super Draft, I think like they go on next generation Adidas contracts and stuff, and they don't actually go to the Caribbean combine. That Andre Blake and people like that. But yeah, we touched on politics, but I thought we were on question time for a minute. I can assure I'm not David Dimbleby. So yeah. I just thought it was an interesting question, really, but we can't provide a definitive answer. I suppose we've got to wait and see what happens with the negotiations and all that kind of thing. I think that pretty much wraps it up. We've done around sort of 40, 45 minutes. Thank you for listening again. I think we covered a fair bit. Let us know your thoughts, by the way, listeners, especially on the subject of the small mentality. In the Caribbean and the psychology that goes on, because that is fascinating. And there's no right or wrong answer on that. It's all about opinions. So do get in touch. I'm on Twitter at Caribbean Football abbreviated to FTPL. Santoki, do you want to plug anything that you're doing or your social media channels?
Yeah, I'm at Santoki, so at SAN_TOKI_. You can find me on Twitter where I've got articles about Guyanese football, Caribbean football, world football in general. So yeah, check it out. Yeah, definitely. Remember to subscribe to Reggae Boys Commentary as well. Simon Preston will be delivering various videos, I'm sure, on not just Jamaican football, but general Caribbean football as well. Thank you for listening. Do leave some constructive feedback in the comments below if you've enjoyed it. If you haven't, do let us know as well.
We look forward to seeing you again next week, Monday, the 15th of August, where we'll hopefully be having a guest on. And then, you know, we'll be working on trying to get some guests on over the next few weeks to provide some insight and some comment. So we look forward to that. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from Santofi. Cheers, guys.
See ya.